April 12th, 2023. The air in Maricopa County Superior Court is thick, heavy with the weight of decades. It clings to the wood paneling, to the stoic faces of the jury, to the shoulders of the man in the orange jumpsuit.
30 years ago.
I know I am different. I didn't understand completely why. I thought it had to do with what my mother did to me.
This man is not the one Phoenix remembers. He is not the zombie hunter, the local celebrity clad in the tactical gear, driving a modified police cruiser, a figure of macabre fantasy and community events. That man is a ghost. The man sitting at the defendant's table is Bryan Patrick Miller, inmate number T373708. The fantasy is over. The reality is just beginning. When Judge Suzanne Cohen speaks, her voice cuts through the stillness. For the 1992 murder of Angela Brasso, life in prison. For the 1993 murder of Melanie Bernas, death. The words hang in the air, a final, irrevocable judgment. But what does that word, death, truly mean in the labyrinthine world of capital punishment? Does it mean a swift end? An execution date circled on a calendar? Or does it mean something else entirely? A beginning, not an end. The start of a slow, meticulous, and psychologically brutal dismantling of a human being. You are about to enter the world Bryan Patrick Miller now inhabits. A world measured in square feet, in steel and concrete, in the agonizingly slow tick of a clock that marks time but promises no release. This is not a story about an ending. This is a story about the hell of waiting for one. The journey from the courtroom to Arizona's death row at the Amen complex is a descent. Every mile traveled, every gate that clangs shut behind him, is another layer of his old life being stripped away. He arrives not as the zombie hunter, not even as Bryan Miller. He is a number, assigned to the Browning unit, a place designed for one purpose, to hold men until the state decides to kill them. Forget everything you know about prison from movies. There are no bustling cell blocks, no yard politics, no semblance of a society. There is only the box. Imagine a space 9 feet long and 6 feet wide. That's 54 square feet. The size of a large walk-in closet or a small bathroom. Now, furnish it. A concrete slab for a bed, topped with a thin mattress. A combination toilet and sink made of cold, unyielding stainless steel. A small concrete desk. That is the entirety of the physical world, for 23 hours a day. Sometimes for weeks on end, it's 24. The walls are cinder block, painted in institutional off-white that seems to absorb all light and hope. There is a solid steel door with a small slot for food trays and a window of reinforced glass, so guards can peer in at any moment. Look up. The ceiling is low, pressing down. There is one window, a narrow slit perhaps 4 inches wide, offering a sliver of the bleached-out Arizona sky. It is a view of nothing, a reminder of an outside world that no longer exists for you. What would you do in that space? You could read, if you can get books. You could write letters, your words passing through the hands of censors. You could do push-ups, pacing the 3 steps it takes to cross your world. But mostly, you do nothing. You sit, you lie down. You stare at the wall, you listen. The soundscape of death row is a character in itself. It is not the cacophony you might expect. It is a symphony of muted dread, the distant clang of steel on steel, the muffled shouts of guards, the low hum of the ventilation system, a constant artificial breath, and sometimes the screaming. A man finally broken by the isolation, his cries echoing down the concrete corridor before being swallowed by the silence that always follows. Silence is the loudest sound here. It's the silence that allows the mind to turn inward, to feast on itself. It's in the silence that the past rushes in, not as a memory, but as a vivid, tormenting present. For Bryan Miller, a man who built an identity around fantasy and control, this absolute loss of control is a unique form of torture. The zombie hunter controlled his environment, his image, his narrative. Inmate T373708 controls nothing. Not when he eats, not when he sleeps, not when the lights go on or off. His body is subject to strip searches. His mail is read. His every movement is monitored. The elaborate costume is gone, replaced by a prison uniform. The modified Crown Victoria is gone, replaced by a 6 by 9 foot cage. The adoring fans at comic conventions are gone, replaced by the detached observation of correctional officers. Everything that propped up his fragile identity has been systematically demolished. What is left when the persona is gone? Time on death row operates under different laws of physics. It is both static and relentless. The days bleed into one another, distinguished only by the slight variations in the food pushed through the slot. Breakfast arrives before dawn, lunch around noon, dinner in the late afternoon. The routine is the only anchor, but it is an anchor in a bottomless sea. It offers no comfort, only the crushing repetition of meaninglessness. The highlight of the week, if it can be called that, is the opportunity for yard time. This is not a yard, it is another cage, slightly larger than the cell, with a concrete floor and a chain-link ceiling open to the sky. For a few hours a week, an inmate can be shackled and led to this pen to see the sun, to feel the oppressive Arizona heat, to breathe air that hasn't been recycled through a prison ventilation system. Human contact is almost non-existent. Conversations are shouted through steel doors. A touch is a rare and often violent event during a cell extraction. The isolation is the point. It is a core component of the punishment. Dr. Stuart Gracian, a psychiatrist who has extensively studied the effects of solitary confinement, termed the resulting psychological breakdown SHU syndrome. It includes symptoms like hypersensitivity to stimuli, perceptual distortions, panic, attacks, difficulties with thinking and memory, and profound paranoia. The mind, starved of normal interaction and sensory input, begins to create its own reality. It begins to break down. Is this what justice looks like? Let's be clear. The crimes that brought Bryan Miller here were monstrous. On November 1792, the body of 22-year-old Angela Brasso was found, decapitated, near the Arizona Canal. 10 months later, in September 1993, 17-year-old Melanie Bernas was found dead in the same canal. For over 2 decades, their families lived in a state of agonizing uncertainty. Their killer, a phantom who became known as the Canal Killer. Justice for Angela and Melanie, for their families, is paramount. But the question we must ask ourselves is what the purpose of this specific punishment is. If the goal is retribution, does a lifetime of psychological torment in a concrete box fulfill that? If the goal is deterrence, does the remote, unseen suffering of one man prevent another's crime? The state has sentenced him to death, but the process of getting there is, by design, a life sentence of its own. The average time spent on death row in the United States before an execution is carried out is now over 20 years. 2 decades. Imagine spending the next 20 years of your life in your bathroom. Imagine the appeals process, a series of legal battles fought by lawyers you may never meet in person. Each appeal is a small spark of hope, almost invariably followed by the darkness of denial. It is a cycle of hope and despair, repeated year after year, that grinds the spirit down to dust. This is the death row phenomenon, a term used by jurists and mental health experts to describe the severe mental trauma experienced by inmates during their prolonged stay under a death sentence in solitary confinement. Some argue it constitutes a form of cruel and unusual punishment in itself, a second sentence layered on top of the first. The man who called himself the zombie hunter, who fetishized a post-apocalyptic world, now finds himself living in one. An apocalypse of the self, a world shrunk to 54 square feet, a population of one. The irony is staggering. He spent his life building an elaborate fantasy to escape whatever darkness lived inside him, only to be placed in an environment perfectly engineered to force him to confront it, alone, for every waking moment of the rest of his life. The state of Arizona will continue to house him, to feed him, to ensure he is kept alive, all for the purpose of killing him at some unspecified date in the distant future. It's a paradox that lies at the heart of the modern death penalty. We keep them alive to kill them. We punish them with life in order to sentence them to death. And in that gap, in those decades of waiting, what happens to the human mind? Does it repent? Does it reflect? Or does it simply disintegrate? The story of Bryan Patrick Miller on death row is not about sympathy for a killer. It is about an unflinching look at the reality of the punishment our society has created. It forces us to move beyond the black and white verdict and into the gray, claustrophobic world of its consequences. It asks you, the viewer, to step into that cell for just a moment, to feel the cold concrete, to hear the silence, to to contemplate the endless succession of identical days stretching into an unknown future. Is this a punishment worse than death? Or is it simply a different kind of death, one that happens not in an instant from a lethal injection, but incrementally, 1 minute at a time, in a concrete box under the Arizona sun? The final answer is one you must decide for yourself.